Good enough.
Recording is on.
Okay, this is the Utility Commission, a special meeting on August 30th, 2023. Let me start out by taking attendance. Hiram Cantu here. Mike Collins. Absent. Bernie Clark.
Here.
Sven Englund. Here. Jill Gazzetti, she had to work, and so Jill's not going to be here tonight. Janae Hunter. Janae, can you? So my email got to you apparently.
It did. Thank you for sending it. I appreciate it.
Good. Krista Kennan.
Here.
Kareem's not here yet. I know he's coming, so he'll probably be here in a minute. Rich Townsend, I'm here. Okay. We have a quorum with 9 people. We need 5. We have 6. So we've got a quorum to go through business. If we start out, we need to approve the minutes for the regular meeting of August 15th, 2023. Are there any comments on them?
No further comments.
No further comments. We had a bunch of comments
Yeah.
earlier. Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Motion. Hiram. Okay. Somebody take notes. Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you. Second.
I'll second. Stan.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Unanimous. Okay. What's next on the agenda?
Public comment.
Next on the agenda is public comment. So the list I have starts with Carter Weiss. Carter, please. Kareem. Good. These are on. That probably is.
Is that on?
Yes.
Good.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you for letting us speak. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to read from this with
Sure.
quick brain dump. Anyway, if I may, Mr. Chairman, 2 quick points or 2 points. At the last meeting, it was discussed there would be 2 possible vendors for the drive-through study. The list of possible vendors was provided by Kevin Moynihan, the outgoing selectman. I believe he narrowed the list down to the 2 potential, one being VCOM and the other one, I don't think was specified. One of the issues is it's already been established through the FOIA requests that VCOM was recommended by Homeland Towers to Kevin. And in turn, it seems like it's a pretty severe conflict of interest since Homeland Towers is a client of VCOM. Also, it's a little surprising that there hasn't been an RFP for this process, since it seems like a pretty important one. We'd also want to know how many other folks have been reached out to in this category. What one would expect at least 4 other vendors to be identified. Especially one that doesn't have a conflict, either fact or appearance. And I have a handout here if you don't mind. You. Noise. I'll be quick. Okay. So if you see in this, in the second to last page, you'll need to turn to it now. You can look at it later. There's a good example what happens when an RFP or a proper process isn't followed. There's been litigation and accusation of unlawful activity in the courts of, with this current vendor in other situations. You can look at that, make your own decision. But, what I'm asking for is not a rushed process and a very clear, good faith effort to identify an independent, qualified group. And I don't think VCOM meets that requirement for what I've seen. And I think it's the commission's obligation to do its due diligence. In there on the first page, you'll see a quick online search that there's a lot of firms that specialize in network development, RF, signal testing. And I wonder if any of those were contacted. It didn't take me long to find them. And then the second point, which I'll be quicker with, at the last meeting, there was a presentation from Homeland Towers. Will there be equal time given to other providers such as small cell, DAS, satellite, or other solutions? And should they be brought in before we go to a study like this and pay for it? Because there may be information they're providing that would change this. A lot of the residents like myself feel that Homeland Towers may not be the best supplier. They only have one solution, that's more large cell towers. Clearly, the town has spoken on our last Republican caucus process that 80% of the folks didn't vote for the current selectman from his own party. So I think there's a change coming, and maybe we should be delaying until the new candidates is selected for first selectman in November, rather than chasing this old issue that keeps going round and around and spending the money. But either way, we're basically working, Homeland Towers, the RFP is a decade old. No due diligence has been put on them. And this whole process feels a little bit rushed to me. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Carter. Next, Joe. Joe Paulo. Yeah, please say your address as well. I'm sorry, I missed that on you, Carter. We can pass it back.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Utilities Commission, Joe Paulo from Arrowhead Trail. I'd like to address two issues tonight. The first regarding some statements that were made last week concerning the supposed hole or gap in the coverage that Mr. Baldwin, Mr. Vergati talked about. Thank you, Bob. And second, talking about the study that you're considering, kind of what's the baseline and how will you actually look at this data with regard to other data? I've shown you two maps here. One is by Verizon on the right, AT&T on the left. These are their publicly available coverage maps. If you go to buy a cell phone today, or you could do it right now from where you're sitting, you could actually see their stated coverage. They're regulated by the FCC, the SEC, and other organizations. So one would think these are honest maps. And Verizon is saying very clearly they have coverage for virtually the entire town of New Canaan, 4G and some 5G. AT&T is better. AT&T has more coverage and certainly 5G coverage, particularly in the area of West School. So the question that came up last week, which is why would Verizon want to do this? Simple, they're behind AT&T. AT&T has built a better network. The map shows that. I showed these maps to the town council on November 16th, and these are just the updated versions of what was available in November. And I think it was instrumental in their decision not to have any support for the West School cell tower. Mr. Moynihan made a comment at that meeting. I gave you the timestamp that AT&T is far ahead of Verizon, more aggressive than Verizon. So that's all consistent. The second page that you have repeats the Verizon map on the right and shows the Homeland Towers map that they talked about last week, which was also presented to the Utilities Commission on November 16th. Now, these two maps are inconsistent. If this was, you were buying a stock, these maps, one says coverage is good. Verizon is saying that to the public. And then Mr. Baldwin, Mr. Vergati, and the technician came and said, look, there's not much coverage. There's a hole in the donut. That was, I think, the phrase that was used. So how do you reconcile these two maps? One of the things that I think is important is that the Verizon map, which says that the coverage is available, that they use to sell their phones, is really a self-correcting mechanism, because if people are buying phones and they're unhappy, they're going to complain and Verizon's going to correct it. So I ask you to consider the fact that substantial coverage exists in this area now where it was suggested that there's a hole. And second, that these maps are in direct conflict with the information you were given last week, and indeed that the town council was given on November 16th. I think you're going to hear some more information about which of the maps are more credible than the others. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joe. And Barbara Wills.
And I'm coming from this side now, so.
Everybody's got a handout.
No,
I didn't think I was going to see you tonight, Barbara.
you know what? The spotted lantern fly just had to go by the wayside.
That's
because
where my wife is.
Oh, good, then I'll ask her
We'll keep you
later.
posted.
So following up, I'm Barbara Wills and I live at 114 Bennington Place. So following up, these are maps that I got off of the FCC website, and it explains that the coverage map was created using data submitted by the carriers. It's voluntary and they have to fill out the FCC's Form 477. If you look at the first map behind this statement, it says Verizon Communications 4G LTE in the west side area has 100% coverage.
Mhm.
If you look at the next map, it says that AT&T has 100% coverage. If you look at the following map, it shows 100% coverage for when you combine 3 carriers that has AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon. Now, the last page is pretty important. And I would definitely tell you to pull it out and really look at it. If people have a problem with coverage, the FCC has an app and people are to download the app and do a speed test between the hours of 6 in the morning and 10 p.m. at night. And they can then have that data registered with the FCC. And if there are enough failing grades that take that provider's data and call it into question, then they will open a challenge file. And then all of these people who have submitted challenges will get monthly updates until the carrier has addressed why there's a difference in what these people are finding and what the coverage that they are claiming to the FCC they have. So I think that's a pretty important thing because we could involve the residents of this town to help us gather the data that
Mhm.
is necessary. If they really have a problem, they can go outside and measure the data.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, anybody else? We have anybody online, Bob? We don't have anybody except Janae online.
No one has their hand raised.
Okay, thank you very much. We will come, I tell you, we will come back to these issues because what we're going to talk about tonight is whether we do a map for our own use or not. So let me tell you where we're at. The next thing we were going to do here was next thing we were going to do was do an executive session where we talked about the different proposals that we hopefully would be getting from other providers for doing a drive-by study. Well, as of right now, we have no other proposals except for VCOM. And so the VCOM proposal has been made public in the past, so we're not going to go to executive session so that we do this as openly as possible. And what we'll do is we will move on to the next thing, which is let's talk about what we've got with VCOM. And let's talk about effectively the subjects that everyone just brought up from their comments, which is how good are the maps that we're seeing? Do we really have a need from the maps we're seeing? And how do we go forward from here? While I'm talking about this, let me just talk about a couple things that I've gotten notes on. One is the executive session. And why did I set up an executive session? Even Kevin asked me that question. Why'd you set up an executive session? And the reason I did was because I presumed we were going to get some proposals that had proprietary information that was not allowed to be shared with the public. And I wanted to be set up to be able to deal with that. Turns out that didn't happen, so we didn't have an executive session. But from a procurement process standpoint, we can't have a public meeting with data that the whoever we're buying from gives us before we choose one. And so that's just the way it is. And I think the way we handle it is exactly like we're handling it tonight. I welcome your questions. What questions do you think we should be asking these folks? And what should we try and understand before we go forward with them? And we've got a bunch of questions for that. The second thing is subcommittees, because I've gotten a couple notes on subcommittees. And I have a view on subcommittees, and that is that they're not very effective. And that view is from when I was on the town council and I was in charge of the finance subcommittee. And I just noticed the following thing. And that was every time we had a finance committee subcommittee meeting, the entire town council came. right?
Yeah, we did.
And so, yeah, exactly. And so that to me said the way subcommittees actually operate is there's one or two people that do most of the work in the subcommittees. And then you go and talk to the main committee. And so my thought, and the reason we haven't talked about subcommittees and we haven't put in place leaders of subcommittees, we put in place leaders of areas of inquiry. And that is so that we don't have these extraneous meetings and we get together and have a more transparent process where everybody can take place in those things that we're allowed to talk to people about. And so what our leaders are intended to do, like Krista, is basically set the agenda and then ask people to do some studying on it and bring it back to the council, to the utility commission here. So you won't be seeing subcommittees. You will be seeing people like Krista, who talks to anybody on the committee that she thinks has the skills to do it. And I think one of the people you hear tonight is Karim, that's been dealing with exactly the issues you're talking about, which is data used in drive-by studies and in the coverage maps. And so that's the way we're intending to operate. And just so nobody's surprised. And I think from the notes I've gotten, people are surprised. So that's why I wanted to do it. So if we could, I think what we should do now, so we're skipping the executive session. Does anybody object to skipping the executive session since it was on the agenda? Okay, then I think
We
that
need a motion.
You have to change the
we
agenda.
probably do, right?
We're not changing, just not executing.
We don't,
No, it's
want-
just not
you don't think
executing.
so? Yeah,
Okay.
Okay,
okay.
it's a good item.
Okay, so I think the next thing we do is point number 5, which is we talk about the information we've got. And I know all of you have got, we've been sending around the proposal. And I know Kevin's very familiar with the proposal, so I presume he'll be glad to answer questions on it. And on why we're doing this.
I'd like to hear from Karim this morning.
I would too. I would too.
Karim, can you kick off?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. So I
You need to pull the microphone real close.
is it better?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm very excited to talk about the data because this is my passion and my life. So one thing which is very important is that explain maybe a little bit the process of how this test is conducted, right? So it's fairly it's quite involved in the term of measuring different information and data point, but you can imagine that you do it in a car and outside, and you measure the different, depending on which bandwidth you're looking at, you're measuring how is the strength of your signal. And that's something that you can even download any app that will, there's free application on Android or Apple that will tell you exactly how many decibel meter, because that's a unit, right? And there's a correspondence between this decibel and the number of bar that you see on your phone. So it's very straightforward. So what is very useful is the RF engineer are going to measure in this decibel meter all along a path, right? Which is on general, like done by the car and this kind of thing. So you
Decibel milliwatt.
right.
Yeah.
So and so once you measure that, you have many data points that are recorded in a computer. What is not done is that the entire map, right? So the process of generating the map that we see here, right? It's an extrapolation, meaning you take the data point and you say, well, I'm assuming that around X feet or meter, depending how you measure, it's going to be the same level of reception. So there's a few subtleties. One is there's a concept of granularity. So for instance, when you do with Verizon that I've done some of this type of test. So when they ask for a drive-by like test or drive test, you have a pretty, depending on how the road are mapping New Canaan, you can go down to a very fine granularity, let's say 10 meters site, right? If you look at the FCC, the one that was presented here, it's the precision is 100 meters. So there's a lot of variation, meaning that the advantage of having a drive test is that you will get necessarily a very fine granularity, right, of precision. The advantage of that is that we can, it depends on what we want to do with this test. And I'll come back to the type of data that we're getting. If we want to see like if the first responder can have a good reception, I think the finer granularity, the better it is. And also it prevents to have some strange phenomenon that I see on this, on the map where, you know, there's a lot of, how would I say, Verizon, because it's proprietary map and method to derive the map, they can basically not being fully accountable. Now, if you have the test with the drive, I can definitely superimpose the map that they're providing with the person that done the drive test, and we can verify there is a lot of inconsistency. And so that, I think, in my opinion, it's very important to have this data no matter what, right? Because it will be non-biased in the sense that maybe Verizon doesn't, or AT&T does not have the time to provide this granularity because it's no big deal. I mean, it's pretty impressive when you have 100 meters and you cover the entire US, right? Now, for New Canaan, it's a big deal because if I walk
It's a
to my
football field.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I didn't transform that, but I know like 200, it's 770 feet. So it's half of that, 300 feet. It's big, right? So that's one thing. The other thing that I was mentioning last time, and I did not was clear, is that once you have this measurement, which we do like with the phone, the app, then it's easy to derive, or relatively easy to derive the coverage. So there's many methods. It's why I was asking Verizon last time, which method do you use? But we can use the same method that they have, unless they're saying it's proprietary, but there's a lot of that are standard to get ourselves a very detailed coverage of New Canaan. And there is another subtlety is that the map that you're seeing are 2D. So let me try to be a little bit more specific. The trouble with this map, they don't take into account the elevation, right? So for instance, like when you are in your home and let's say you have a big slope, they are going to tell you have a good reception, but it might not be the case because they don't have this topographic information. Now they do have technically this topographic representation. It's just they don't go through the pain of showing this 3D map. And I think that's very important because it will also inform us which type of solution, right? Because I can demonstrate to you, like, let's say my house was behind this counter. I can tell you, it doesn't matter how high you put your tower, you're never going to reach me. However, if you do local cell just on one post, which is, as we heard last time, doable, right? If you go and ask the Verizon or AT&T, you will fix this problem. So there's a situation where the problem is only fixable by a certain type of solution. And that, again, that's why I believe this information is important. So if you go in these things, I define each type of information that we should collect or receive. This is standard, right? I looked at even, I found that some colleague of mine that was providing that for Verizon. So it's nothing crazy. I'm just asking things like the longitude, latitude, where you take the measurement, which bandwidth did you look at and record them. And so there's different bandwidths to look at depending on the, if you're 5G or LTE, etc. Right? So I'm just defining, and the elevation. So one thing that's going to be super useful for us, and in general, it's not used in any map that you can request for any vendor, is how do you take into account the topography, I mean, the topology of your the region where we are. Number one. Number two, I think what I will also be able to provide just for the fun of it is that I have the ability to measure the density of the population because we have this information as a New Canaan. Meaning I will also be able to tell you, depending on the house, which house will not receive good coverage. And so you will be able to know that, like, I think for the first selectman, it might be useful to know that a certain person of his population is underserved, right? But that would be factual, right? So I think it's the type of thing that will help us to say, look, in this part of New Canaan, there's, let's say, 300 people that are clearly have no reception. Or they do have reception, but we will get an answer to that. So saying that, if you go back to the list of the field or, you know, the quantity that I requested, I explicitly give a definition of it. In general, they don't, right? When you're a professional, you just give the name and they know that. So I think part of whoever we talked with, we just say, look, we know that you're recording this information. So this information is not magic. Just give us a copy. That's it. So if we do a RFQ or if we talk to a vendor, this is something that I've seen being done, and I think I would advise to ask it for the vendor.
So when you say going in the Z-axis vertically,
Yeah.
looking at field strengths. As far as I know, you know, the guys drive around in a truck with an antenna on the top, you know, and
Right.
I don't think there's,
No.
they're not
but-
measuring that, really.
No. But what is important is to know at which elevation they did that, because when you go with
Okay.
the road, they will go down, right? Let's say you go to Wahakme, which I know, like there's a dead zone, like when you go.
Yeah, and
When you go down.
hopefully you've
So-
got a cell, or, you know, you've got 100-meter, you know, measurement point that's, you know, at the dip, you know, put down by the swamp. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, what I mean is, like, if I know that the car went down, and I can also correlate with the fact that I have the topography of the place, right? So
I see. I understand.
know that I can infer that their measurement makes sense why we didn't get a reception because we were down.
I understand.
And I can literally, you know, there's some program that basically you overlay the topography and you send a ray, like literally ray on all the direction from a supposed antenna, and then you measure if it makes sense.
Yeah, which
and-
is why Rich doesn't have any service down by the 5 Mile River.
That's right.
That's right, and we'll definitely confirm that. So, for instance, like some ambiguity is that I look at the FCC map and they're saying that, oh, I'm supposed to get so for Verizon, I'm supposed to get some reception, but I didn't get anything. I know that in my home. It's why I have subscribed to AT&T, because AT&T has a better coverage for me, right?
Exactly.
So the question is, like, literally, we can expose this information to the public, at least to our people, and let them also see. And there's no need, for instance, I think it's a good idea. I don't know what you call, like, the lady that crowdsourcing. Sorry, I forgot your name.
The
FCC.
FCC.
Right.
challenge.
So the FCC challenge, we can clearly, when we have a good map which is detailed, we know who should be doing that, right? Maybe we don't need to ask to all the population to do that when we know that they have reception there. But I think it's also an avenue to consider. So I think there is a lot of interesting new technology that could help us basically to have a finer granularity and finer definition of the problem, which means that even if the city has to buy a tiny antenna that will cover a football field, we might solve a problem that will not be solvable by a cell tower, The example typically is a road that go down.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter how high you make your tower, the fact that you're down, you're not going to reach it, right?
Just have a quick question regarding the granularity you're talking about, because there's always going to be some level of extrapolation.
Absolutely.
Always at some level, and
Yeah.
there's not much you can do about that.
No.
I'm curious, at least from your experience, from what you understand, the drive-by, the data, getting the information that you have, there's still an extrapolation from the road to the house.
Right.
Of
So-
which there's not, other than people, every citizen in their house doing the challenge and providing that data, there's not much we can do with that, other than maybe acknowledging there may be some elevation that that's clearly gonna be a problem, but there's nothing we can really do to solve that distance or that problem. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
I mean, it's not much
But
to
the
say.
advantage is in general, what if you want to be slightly sophisticated, in general, you give a map of error on top of the map that you have. What's missing when you look at the map, it seems accurate, right? But in general, you could put a standard deviation of your measurement.
Yeah.
Or the modeling. So it's why
Scope of the colors, the scope of
Correct, the
that,
scope.
of those cells that's being put
So
on
you-
every map.
your comment is really, really important, because once we have the data, we can do that. This is very trivial. I mean, it's not trivial, but it's scientifically easy to do. Is what is your uncertainty or certainty on the measurement on the map? And that's not no Verizon or AT&T will show that, because they have no interest in doing that, right?
Hiram, can we analyze raw data to determine validity?
Yeah.
In other words, if you have,
Sorry.
say you have a non-preferred provider.
Yeah.
Well, I won't even say that. Say you have a provider who has been subject to some questioning about the possible validity of their data. If we look at raw data, can we determine the validity?
Whoa, that's a good question. So so in general, so some RFP that I've seen, there's a requirement of what we call random measurement, meaning, let's say you have a test drive and you have a third party who is going to say, oh, I'm just going to measure at 5 points, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to say, hey, I'm coming with you and I want to measure Frogtown, Wahakme, and Irving Park. So this will guarantee in general that there might not be error in the measurement or things have not been done properly, because your question is very important and difficult to answer. Unless you do what we call sampling of what we have measured, you have no guarantee that. I'm not saying that, you know, there's nothing malicious, but it could be that, you know, like the person drove too fast, so for instance, or they forgot to turn on the system. So this kind of sampling is guarantee that what we got is a high quality. And in general, this is really not expensive. It's just having somebody that redo randomly some few samples.
Well, I was just wondering if we're looking at, you know, at a raw data spreadsheet, you know, it would seem that it's, you know, like if you wanted to make the data appear better or worse, it would be easier to do that when you ran it through the model, right? Rather than fudging the data on the front end.
100%.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. Because what does the model is that they're going to make sure that it's smooth. So they are going to artificially smooth.
Well, it's all filtered, yeah.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So the raw data is probably not fudgeable.
No, it's very difficult. It will show up because the inconsistency in you will show also defect if, like, for instance, they change the system for any reason. They would change the appliances or the device that measure. It's not calibrated to exactly match the previous one. So we will show that on the raw data. Absolutely.
So it's just a spectrum analyzer, right?
It is.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay.
So this is really interesting, but it brings to the front. What are we going to do with these maps? right? And what
Sure.
are we doing the map for?
That's right.
And I think part of the reason we're doing the map is if we can show everybody's covered, that's a good argument to say we don't need a tower, right? Or if we show we got a lot of blank space, it's a good reason to say we need a tower. So this, I think part of the objective of doing the
Tower
map
or means to.
or means to fill it.
Or a tower plus something else
Plus
for
something else.
particular
Something else,
areas of
exactly.
efficiency.
And you took that further and said, look, if I really get this data, I could go down to the house and I could make sure
Yeah.
that Krista has service, right? And maybe that's
Just
something
her.
we ought to do, and maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Right? But I think one of the things is, will this help us do that? And will we use it that way?
I would advise, to do that. Yeah.
And
Knowing that in general, doing this type of analysis could be, if you go outside and things could be quite expensive or things, but it's something I've done in the past. So I don't have any problem to do that for the city, right? But that would definitely, I think it has a value in the sense that for the city and the people who live in city, they can show that we are doing a very in-depth work. People are more and more versed in technology, and it's critical. And trying to just show maps that are smooth and not detailed, I think it's not trusting our people. Just give them even raw data would knock yourself out, because I think it's part of like being in a community and giving the best that we can, right?
Mhm.
Being transparent.
Well, if we go back to 2013, Tom Teslick that was over here doing this work came to the conclusion, these guys lie on all their maps. And that's one of the reasons that he thought it was important to have the city involved in this,
Yeah,
right?
agree.
To protect ourselves, right? And I think this just says we're kind of on the same wavelength here. And and I would comment just a couple things that I came across.
But one thing that I may say is that, it has been done long. I mean, for me, 10 years, it's a lot in terms of the technology. So I would not like, they done their review with the element and the technology they have, right? 10 years ago, I would not be able to run this type of model on my computer. Like
Right.
we have to be aware of that, right? I can do it now because your iPhone, right, is like 10 years, the desktop is less powerful than your iPhone, right? So let's put also in the context, right? Not saying that, hey, why don't they did that before? No, absolutely not. Is that today we have such advanced, and you can see it in AI or any other, the power and the computation, that we can do this analysis. And the other thing is like, we could even, for fun, we could put ChatGPT on it and say, hey, what is my reception on my home? What should I do? A machine will be able to answer. Does it existed 10 years ago? Absolutely not.
Well, we're trying to, you're absolutely right. We're trying to figure out, I think, here tonight, can we live with one proposal, right? Kevin, I think you've had a hard time finding more places that would give us a legitimate proposal, right?
Discussions.
Yeah, this is not a discussion.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I apologize, I'm maybe catching up, but are you separating the idea about gathering the data, the raw data, and the interpretation of it?
Absolutely.
And you have somebody or yourself that does the interpretation?
I'll do the interpretation.
So whoever we hire is really
I don't
just.
care. So I just care. Sorry. The only thing that we have to be, so like the RFP I've seen from Verizon was 4 years ago. So it's not that old, right? But they deliver this, they ask to the person who is doing the test to deliver this type of information. So I'm just asking as a benchmark, anybody that we get to comply to provide to us the thing, right? Otherwise, I would like to understand why it cannot be done, right? And I think the thing that I'm proposing is to avoid any conflict. They can definitely deliver to us the map. I don't have no problem. It's even better. We can double check, right? But we can separate the issue from collecting the data, which is something that need a car and
Really
a
important.
device and program, I guess, as we mentioned. So it's something that it's a job in itself. Now, the advantage is that the computational power has been increased so much that we can even also do our own due diligence on the model that is produced, right?
So if we can assure that we're getting the data,
That's right. That's-
we can assure that it can't be
The
played with,
interpretation.
the
of the data.
interpretation, and
Yeah.
there are ways to interpret it differently. And
Or like,
the
we
only
can
reason
even,
for bringing up Tesla was to say, he pointed out they were interpreting it differently 13, that back in 2013. And at least right now, the FCC is going around and around with the carriers saying, you are sending us bad data,
that's right.
right? I mean, that's exactly what they're saying. I mean, just to confirm what Barbara said, that article I was reading this morning, all three of the vendors that we're talking about, which is Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, are off and overstate their coverage by something like 35 to 40% in the stuff they have been sending the FCC. And they're required by law to send it. And the answer from them to the FCC is, we're generating it the way you told us to. We told you it was wrong. And now you're mad that we're doing what you told us to do. That's from them. But I think it comes right to what Karim is talking about, which is if we've got the data, we can figure it out. Right? Now, the FCC appears to be onto this.
Yeah. we should-
They are trying to put together a much better mapping system, and it appears they are doing a little bit better on that.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, how soon they really get there, I don't know.
I mean, yeah, if you want to wait, I mean, it's.
But that raised the question, should we wait? I mean, I think for the cost of what we're talking about doing here, I'm not sure it's worth risking waiting, right? I mean, the current bid is $12,000, right?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable.
So it's not a whole lot of money to pay for risk reduction, quite frankly. And so, but this is what we're trying to
No,
decide.
not only that, again, we will have also material for the first selectment to make decision on other issues, right? Meaning there might be the density of the population in New Canaan in a certain area. Should we address the fact that they are not receiving anything? The first responder, is that really like a totally dark zone where nobody can see anything? This will have the information, right? That's what I was trying to. Maybe I was not clear also on that for the people at the discussion in detail, is that there's a concept of, for instance, if we even if the town paid for a small antenna, but if it has a reduce the cost of, let's say, adding a big tower, because it's going to serve the density that we're missing, that might solve the problem, and the cost that we're spending per area of New Canaan is still the same. So the question that we have to understand, and it's I know it's a little bit like more like in finance that we look at, but it's the return on investment over a surface or over the number of people. So we will be able to give this information of the people who are making the decision, and it will integrate the notion of the cost, right? And that's important, I believe. And that's a different approach that you can provide. I'm sure I have quant here that knows what I'm talking about. Right?
There's
Financial or engineering.
Right, yeah.
But there's several things we're talking about, which is September 30th is when we want to be done because of the.
Can I bring that up, Rich, quickly? I wasn't here at that first meeting when the September 30th date came up. And I know it was because I understand about fall foliage, but I was looking, according to Connecticut map I've pulled up, it says the peak foliage for New Canaan is the second week of November, November 14th. So I don't know why we said we have to be done by September 30th.
Oh, that's great input.
I think we have another at least 6 weeks, actually 6 weeks beyond that before leaves even start falling off the trees, according to the state of Connecticut's website.
Well, that certainly says we have more time.
Yeah.
Right? We have
That's a
more
good
time
news.
to get it while foliage is covered.
Yeah, I don't think September 30th is, I'm a big believer, as I said last week, I would like multiple bids. I'd like to get RFP. I still want to make sure that we've been clear about how they're going to simulate the northwest tower that's supposed to be built and what the strength of that's going to be and the parameters about that. Like, I just don't, this is such important data. I don't think this is something we rush to and just get the one vendor who we have to do this. I would like to make sure, for the sake of everyone in the town, we've gone through a full process and RFP and we've looked at multiple vendors. And similar to whoever that was that spoke earlier, I Googled, it looks to me like there are a fair number of these companies out there.
Kevin, you wanna talk about this for a minute?
I have a few thoughts.
Sure.
One reaction is to your thought about what the iPhone and the smartphone does today. Right? And Barbara alluded to this when she was up here back in October in the fall. She said, you know, we don't have a camera anymore. We don't have everything's in this.
Right.
But this doesn't work without a reliable cell signal. Reliable, not just coverage. Think of the difference between coverage. Because where I live on Elm Street, I get 1 bar. Downtown New Canaan. I go over to Irwin Park, there's no coverage.
Mhm.
Verizon. I think,
Yeah, but you know,
I think we polled everybody, almost everybody on here has.
no,
Verizon,
but
right?
that's a good,
Yeah.
good comment, if I may, because the bar is exactly, and I'll send to the committee a graphical representation of the decibel
Well,
that
but
you can
again,
receive, right?
You go to the beach in Puerto Rico, you get 5 bars. You go to Africa, you get 5 bars. That's reliable cell service. You get 1 bar. You get half a bar. I drove up Ponus Ridge this afternoon, and I now carry an AT&T phone that belongs to the town, so I can always be looking at how Verizon compares to AT&T.
I have
get it.
5 bars. Right?
I get it why AT&T customers think we don't have a problem. Because they're a hell of a lot better in New Canaan. And I have no lawyer, other than we all have Verizon. Tell me why. The town, all of our employees have Verizon.
I don't
So-
know. You
Again, I
You're
have no
the
loyalty
you're
to
the
Verizon
first
other than trying to
selectman.
figure out. I have a grandson that lives in Greenwich.
Yeah.
I have 5 grandchildren, Greenwich. My son has a severe peanut allergy, right? My son can't not have a landline because twice he's gone to the hospital in the ambulance, right? You have to be able to make a call,
Mhm.
a 911 call, an emergency, right? Time is of the essence in an emergency, no matter where you are in town. You have a stroke, a heart attack, a car accident, you got to be, that's not first responders. That's time to the hospital when you have an emergency. I can give you lots of cases of people that didn't have the time to get to the hospital in time. So anyway, the point is, this whole thing is about a modern town where you have reliable cell service. So these devices work everywhere. Everywhere, not just, we have 125 miles of road in town, right? This company, whoever it is, comes and they drive this equipment around and they test every single road. And I know I know where Krista lives. I know where Rich lives. When I look at the map that they produce, I know why there's no cell service where Krista lives, right? I know these roads, right? So interpreting what the map produces is based upon what you know about the town. So I just think we got a lot of education. We're getting our educational level up here.
We are.
You know, something that Tom Tesla took 5 years to get to and made a recommendation for a tower 500 feet from West School. We're proposing 900 feet from West School now. And everybody I talk in the industry thinks we're crazy to think there's a health issue.
But Kevin, talk about single sourcing here, because I just like to point out to everybody, I spent some time going through our purchasing procedures and the state's purchasing procedures. This does not require multiple bids.
Sure.
This does not require sealed bids. It does not require RFPs. It is up to the purchasers within the town up to about $50,000, especially with professional services.
Yeah.
They can single source it if they think that's the wise thing to do.
No, if there's 3 or 4 other providers out there, we haven't found them yet on the East Coast. I talked to John Keating, who's out in Denver, Colorado. He no longer does the business, right? But he'd be willing to interpret and consult with us on what the data shows once we have it. So you have a peer review, right? Find me another company on the East Coast.
Maybe we can try to look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, you know, we've been searching. There aren't that many.
Sir,
Again, you
please.
know, we have
Sir,
somebody
we
in town that
cannot-
Works on this. We don't have a staff, right? Well, who did? Who? Of course.
We have no commit, take it from the, but give that job to the commissioner.
I,
That's
I
not-
welcome, that's what Tom Tesling did. The only two people.
Not our
worked on it
job.
Not our job.
For 5 years. Rob Malazzi and Tom Tesling. Only two people worked on it. Tom Teslick and Rob Malazzi, 5 years. Right. And they didn't produce a single tower in 5 years. Anyway,
I mean, just to, have a reality check, the Board of Selectmen, per the town charter, are in charge of all purchasing agents and these kind of matters. We serve as the Utilities Commission as a consultant and make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen so that they can then go pick ultimately the vendors that they want. We are not elected officials. We are an advisory group to the Board of Selectmen, and only they can make these decisions. And Rich makes a very valid point. If there is a matter that is less than $50,000, a formal RFP and what have you do not. If you're talking about paving roads and it's $2.5 million a year, that's a very different matter.
I guess I want to argue that it might not be required, but I think for the sake of how controversial this topic has been and the fact that it's come up 3 times, the more transparent and the more we can do to show that we're looking at all aspects of it and we've had I think it would be appreciated by the town.
Which is exactly what we're trying to do. And Kevin, I am sure, would have multiple bids if he could find them, that he hasn't been able to find them yet.
I invite anybody to find another bidder. Let's take 2 weeks, a month, find another bidder on the East Coast.
Right. I mean, for example, one of the vendors listed on one of these handouts is Centerline, and I believe they went bankrupt.
Right.
So, okay. I mean, I think that we have a proposal on the table, and that's not to say that we can't also
Right.
still look for vendors and what have you. But yeah, you just keep,
We can make tonight.
right. I mean, I don't think there's any harm in moving forward with the proposal that is on the table that can get the raw data that we then can vet ourselves, until people are comfortable. And then in parallel path, initiate the study. We can also look for other studies. This is not about making a decision about a tower. All we want to do is get data points to inform all of
Right.
our citizens. And I think if everyone just takes a deep breath to that then we can move forward with information. Data is always the most valuable thing. And if we have access to it and we can vet it, there's no harm in that.
I think we may want to look at other sources of that data, though.
Sure,
Sure.
absolutely.
So if we move forward with this, we're spending $12,000, we may get yet another set of data.
We can absolutely make that decision tonight. I mean, the decisions we can make tonight are, we could make a decision to go ahead with the single vendor. We could make a decision to see if Kevin can go get more vendors or anybody else that could dip into the ocean to suggest them. We can decide not to do the study at all. We could decide to wait for the FCC to fix their stuff. We could decide anything we want to decide, but your information about November, the second week in November clearly gives us some scope, I think, to move it. A couple of questions I would like to ask Kevin, just relative to the single sourcing, is I don't think the current proposal we have is what we asked for. Because we asked them to be able to model in the tower on Ponus Ridge that is going in as part of this, and that's not in the current
No,
scope.
I talked about that. They
Did you? Because it's
they
not
can
in the
add that.
current scope that you sent around.
Well, that's the February proposal before, but we talked to them.
Okay, but you
after
think
the
that,
February-
you think that would be able to go in? Do
Well,
you,
you have to put a crane up and put antennas up
I
there to
understand.
simulate.
it might be more, it
Right.
might be a bigger price, right?
Yeah,
It'll
right.
probably be a bigger price.
Okay.
Do you think we will have a problem if we went back with Kareem's requirement that it's our data, we're paying you to get the data, it's our data, we
It's
want
always
it.
our data.
No. What he's saying is that could you provide to them the definition of the data that is standard and make sure like
I welcome,
Yeah.
you fellows ought to get involved in.
I
specifying
stand
I
it-
think
that.
I
we
sent
want to
it
get
to-
involved with talking to them.
Mhm.
Okay,
yeah
I think perhaps we ought to even go back to C squared and say, can you just do the drive test and don't, produce don't
Yeah.
interpret the data. Let someone else interpret the data.
Sure.
All we're talking about is the mechanics of getting this drive test
That's
done.
right.
So we
That's
get the
right.
data and then decide how to use it.
Absolutely.
So,
I agree.
Unless we get some antenna on my car.
Then we could.
No,
And I could sit in the back seat
Yeah, you
with,
will.
with a spectrum analyzer and write it down in a notebook.
You've done that before. So.
Can we just go back to one? I just want to make sure I'm following what we said earlier about the sampling, the
Yep.
5, 6 sampling. How, like, who could do that?
I wanted to
Sure.
question that. This is actually 125 miles road. They will drive every single road. That's actual data at every elevation that road is at.
Yeah.
So where's the sampling? They're not,
No. I'm explaining the sample.
Yeah.
It's like you basically get to remeasure only like at 5 point where you randomly select, which means if there are no issues in their measurement, it has to be the same. But because it's random, they cannot, people cannot, how would I say, fudge the data. How would I explain? Maybe I'm not explaining properly. You can help me to understand. It's like,
Right, it's just like, just taking 5 and just sort of checking it and seeing
right.
that they're within reason, that there wasn't a technological error or any type of error.
Yeah.
And I was just curious in terms of like who, because
well, in
you're
general,
getting,
it's a third party that you just pay for 2 or 3 hours and that's it. They're just there to check that the guy is reading the right number, and but it's very trivial. But it's
it's just a check.
because
It's just a check. It's a check.
our colleague asked this question and it was very, very relevant. It's something that we know and we had to deal with because, you could say, how do you guarantee that the person is going to drive all the road on New Canaan and do a good job? The only way is, a good way is to do this sampling. You pay somebody for 3 hours to go with the guy that did the measurement at 4 points, and that's it. I don't know if it makes sense. Maybe it does not.
How many days does it take for them to drive the 125 miles of road in town?
couple of days.
So you can't just have this guy ride along one day, right, for a couple hours?
No.
Yeah,
one
you
day is
can.
enough.
All you need to do is get a couple of samples.
That's it, yeah. It could take even like
After the
10 minutes if you
Yeah,
got
but the other 3 days, the guy's. running
Either
around.
after or during.
Right, but the guy, okay, so let's say, let me try to
It's
explain
not just
what I
one
mean.
guy, by the way. When I talk to
Right,
these
it's a
people,
truck
I
of
mean,
gear.
this is not just
It's one guy, but let me explain what I mean. It's like, let's say somebody is producing 100 hamburgers, right? for the sake. I want to make sure that the hamburger are good quality and they are not stale, right? I'm not going to eat 100 hamburgers. But if I don't tell the cook that I'm going to take number 12 and number 55 and number 80, it's going to be difficult for him to put me bad meat because he doesn't know which one I'm going to test, right? So it's a standard procedure that even when you have a plant that's producing cars or toys, what do? They pick randomly, control the quality of the system. They cannot play with all the toys. It would be a waste of time or anything. It's standard statistical method to ensure that we answer the question that was really deep, and then say, how do you ensure that the data is good?
Well, my point was, if it's gonna take the group 3 days to drive around town, and you're only gonna check him on that one day, he could be driving too fast or miss roads on the second and third day. How do you, just because that random on the first day, how's that guarantee on second day?
That guarantee, if you go to the same place at the same elevation, you should measure the same number of decibel or close, or with a tolerance. The tolerance would be an error, right? So in general, there's absolutely no reason why you should not get the same number.
What we're not saying is that you have to be in the truck, okay, for the 3 days. All it says is that at some point you go out and you recheck the measurements at given GPS location and check that the dB milliwatts that we're receiving are the same or within experimental tolerance.
That's right.
Understood. Now I can see the
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, I was not very clear, but I think.
Can I ask a question though? So if we have the field doing the drive test, how, without doing RFP, are we going to be clear that the simulation of the Northwest Tower is going to be the same. Like, I'm a little nervous that we're just saying, oh, they're gonna simulate it, put up on a crane. It seems like that's very specific, like what's the wattage, what's the access, what carriers, like, I just don't know how that's being done without a lot of detail. It seems like we need that for the data to be correct.
That's a good question.
You haven't installed the same equipment that would be put on the tower.
Do we know what that is?
So,
We don't, but somebody does.
well, Verizon has already specified what they're putting.
What they're
their-
putting
their-
on that tower.
Yeah.
that's what
But
they-
AT&T has expressed interest in it as well, right? But we don't know what, do we know what they're doing?
Well, we know what they're doing at their other towers, so they're gonna do the same thing at that tower. They want the same kind of, latest generation equipment on their tower.
And we know the height that each of those antennas is going to be, that we can simulate that and get the same kind of antennas? And are these people without RFP going to do that same thing?
Again, as Rich said, it's gonna cost more money to simulate it than to.
Right.
Another thing that was said to me by John Keating in Colorado was that, these drive tests are going by the board because there's been such a development in computer simulation that you don't need to do the drive test anymore. People realize, and he said, I can look at what they produce and I can tell you that's reliable because that's what the industry standard is today, to simulate by computer modeling, just like a lot of things do, computer manufacturing. And that's as good as a drive test. And people rely upon that.
Well, that kind of begs the question, should that be the second vendor, that we have a computer simulation,
Well, that's what,
mimic it and also account for the topography,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
That
that-
we- I
that
mean,
you're
that
not
would
going
be
to
an
have.
but
overlay.
that's what Verizon has done.
No.
They're
They don't do.
they don't do drive tests anymore. They,
No,
Yeah.
but they
But the
don't
computer
take into
simulation.
account the elevation. That's for sure. Like,
So
look
is-
at the map. Absolutely not. Where do you see the elevation?
So
Is
is
this-
there an outside consultant that we could look to that will
I'm
do
sure-
the old fashioned drive-by test
Right.
and then
Right.
utilize another technology really and see how they compare to give people confidence in all the tests?
It's just like this other root metrics thing, which
Mhm.
I sent to you, right? Root
Yeah.
metrics provide some pretty fancy data,
Right.
right? It
Right.
looks to me like it's kind of happy data,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But they're out there selling it. So.
Yeah. Well, it seems that we're going, if whoever we go with, and if we find some other people that we go out and do, we need to be a little bit more, we need to be quite specific on what the proposed work scope is, which is an RFP, right? I mean, that's exactly what you're talking about. We need to be much more specific about it. If we could just come back to these guys for a minute, one of the questions I have, who owns this company? VCOM, who owns VCOM?
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either. I went looking, I couldn't find it. But not because they're hiding it, just because didn't have a lot of time to look for it.
New Jersey, Pennsylvania, South Jersey. I mean, they have,
Well, I'd be very interested. I hope it's owned by the executives because it would make a big difference as to what the
founded in
motivations are.
95, 27 years. Presumably by the professionals that do the
Yeah,
business.
I don't know. They borrowed $375,000. So this is not a high
They're not-
cost, high capitalized company.
They're not in D and B?
Well, I didn't go looking there.
Oh, okay.
I didn't go look. I'm sure they are.
Yeah.
I'm sure they are. And I'm sure it's health. I don't have the resources to do some of that stuff anymore.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, so who has some more questions about this or comments they want to make? And then maybe we can start to draw some conclusions on what we want to do. Karim has really passed us a terrific opportunity with your skills
Thank you very much.
in being able to have more flexibility in how we do it.
Yeah.
And how we do it. Kevin, how long will it take to, once we decide on the vendor, to get him to actually do the work? I mean, how much time have we got between now and the second week in November?
What's the lead time
What's the lead time?
from ARO
ARO.
after receipt of order?
I think they only need 2 or 3 weeks notice to
Okay.
do it, and then it's a couple, and then to generate the report. It's all computer. model or computer.
Okay, so we have some time here to deal with this.
So between now and our next meeting on the 19th, are we going to,
We got
are we going to refine our requirements with Karim's input?
I think what's clear is that the specific data and the information that they have when they get it.
Right.
Making sure that we get that.
That's
Not
right.
that we
That's
own it,
right.
'cause it sounds like we own it, but
That's
it's
it.
like that we make it clear to them. Like that's,
That's it.
I think that's
yeah,
an absolute, I think that's one clear conclusion. I think that we
absolutely.
can agree. I'm not sure that's something that we would vote on or anything, but I think that's a clear process that we would make a recommendation that be given to the
Yeah,
vendor
it's-
that
it-
is
It's the
selected.
recommendation. I hope it's approved, but I mean, this.
Right. I think it's
All
clear.
right,
That's
and then
clear.
the second point for Sven, is that we query the named firms that have come forward from the public today to determine if they are capable of performing to
The drive.
to the drive study requirements. And, you know, if they're not, then we'll note that. Okay,
Okay, anything
does
anything
that,
else?
does that fit?
And third, that we look into a computer simulated
We talked to,
As an option. depending
as
on
an
those.
alter,
That,
right.
that could be, something can be packaged with kind of a base case drive.
Yeah,
whether it
absolutely.
gets-
Yeah.
Or another RFP.
Well, a
depending on the
different
response, right,
vendor, I
right.
think, from
Well,
a
we need-
different
yeah.
vendor
I
is
agree, I
really
agree,
the
yes.
key.
the
I
whole
think.
point is trying to find one other
Right. Organization. to work
responder to
with.
the RFP.
Yes.
Right.
I think also just, sorry, just to be extremely precise, if you wanted something else than just the sampling, the other way is to get another drive test, right? So,
Well,
Well,
I mean, I'm just being extra.
That's the extreme. That's sort of
That's
the,
extreme.
that's the,
at
bookend,
some
that's
point,
the
at some
bookend of a
point, you know, we
verification.
sit there, you know, we make recommendations, but you know, it's all comes
I
out
know, I
of
know.
tax money,
Yeah.
you know, and
No, but I want it to be complete and
that's the
exhaustive.
bookend of a.
so we understand.
this is consistent with what we discussed in
It
last
is.
month's meeting, that we wanted at least two organizations to move forward with. And then if we look at a computer simulated vendor, that gives us another path.
And I also do think we need to be clear, one of our to-dos to be to find out more what the simulation is of that tower on the northwest corner, so we know what we're asking, because I think we have to be very clear to these people what we expect that to be. If like, what antennas are gonna be there, which carriers are gonna be there, what height are they gonna be, and let's be very clear about that simulation as well when we do the request and proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the carriers are not going to provide the equipment, you know, for a simulation test.
So how are we gonna simulate it? How would they simulate it?
We have the company that does the drive study come up with the, you know, with the J-lift and, you know, and a transmitter.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, for a given amount of power output, you know, we will measure, you know, how that fades, you know, as you drive away from it by watching that frequency with a spectrum analyzer.
And yeah, absolutely that. But we can also, once we have one type of measurement, if the system are not too different, which they should not, in the sense that, for instance, if you have a 5G, it's in a certain band, right, of hertz. So you can also, with a certain error, use this type of information. So what I mean is, it's not an absolutely a big problem if they are putting a different type of system, as long as they tell us that it's for the 5G or the LTE, because they have to respect some norms, right? So even if the appliances are different, it's still okay.
So even if, but we do need to know at least which carriers are gonna be on there and what they plan to use 5G or what they plan to put on it, right? So we can account for any differences.
Yeah, that's the most important, right? Because that will guarantee on which range what we're saying the power is going to be transmitted. So that's, if we are looking at 5G, then we need to make sure that they put up some appliances that measure the 5G. So if you look at my proposal on the data, you will see all the different band that I'm putting, right? To make sure that we cover. So that's, once we have that, we can answer your question for sure.
Thank
So-
you.
Okay, so of this, the things that I hear that we've got some real work to do is how do we find some other companies? That's, I don't know. I don't personally know how to go find that. I worked on it all afternoon and I didn't find
Yeah.
a whole lot. Right? And the ones I found were not appropriate.
But
that's
we
where-
can, but the least that we can do is, sit there and answer the question about,
Right.
does TUV do anything?
Yeah, but I'm just worried, I'm just thinking about how do we actually get somebody to spend several days figuring out whether, I know you worked on it,
I
Kevin.
remind you, we talked to Anthony Lepore with
We did.
the president of Cityscape, right? He's
Yep.
based in Florida, but he's in Washington DC. And he consults on throughout the East Coast, right? And he's the one he
didn't know
he gave
anybody.
me two references. That's how I ended up with AMDOCS. AMDOCS turned out, I still don't understand AMDOCS. I mean, AMDOCS seems like they have
Do-
capabilities, but they can't.
Do we have anybody, does anybody know anybody that,
It, um,
that understands the industry
So,
and
yeah,
perhaps
so
would have
the
a resource?
did we ask on the other CT, maybe they have some recommendation? They must have done that, like Darien or whoever.
I guarantee it, those other towns
I have
haven't done anything.
Luckily, they don't have our problem.
Oh, they
Yeah.
don't have a problem.
Well-
They don't have their problem. Is they have I-95, all those big
Oh,
towers.
yeah, I
right?
remember.
And they got Route 1.
No, but I mean,
and-
I mean, like all Wilton. I mean, big.
They got Route 7, just line the antennas up.
Okay, so like I
No, but
I
Wilton-
will ask my colleague. Right, it has been a long time,
Mhm.
but I will ask them. Yeah,
That would be very helpful.
sure.
That would be very helpful.
Wilton's in the process of building a tower, Verizon only tower. I shouldn't say Verizon only, Verizon sponsored it without a tower company. And it's not far from their schools. It's in their bus parking lot over there. And
But I'm just advocating just to provide the data. I'm not. I know, like as a member of this utility commission, I'm not making decision. I'm trying to give you as a decision maker, what is the best data and information that we can provide to you so you can make your decision. In the study, I don't think we're going to study the healthcare issue because that's not been mentioned, right? So the only thing that I will provide for the city is how the most accurate coverage that we can provide. That's the only thing that I can recommend. I hope
Understood.
my
Understood.
I didn't mention that I
You
would.
did not
tell-
overpromise. We're good.
Oh my gosh.
No, but the way you're going to figure it out is how much power lands in every place, right?
That's right. And I think
Which
that
would certainly be an input to the health study.
absolutely after you can make your decision. But I think it's something that you see with the SCC, it's a real need. So we are going, in fact, to unless we wait for them, we're going to solve that problem locally, right?
Mhm.
And I think for 12,000, it's not a big deal. I believe that.
It's a worthy investment.
Well, we got some more
That's a
time to work on
start.
this, so we can certainly do it. The other thing we need to do, and Kern, maybe you can help do this, is to really write the work scope.
Sure, that I can do that too. Yeah, I just give you the data because honestly, as long as the data is respected, I'm pretty happy. But yeah, I've done the rest. The rest is in general is boilerplate, but I will
Probably.
do it. Yeah,
We ought
I'll
to
give
just-
you
we
a
ought to just write it
sample.
down
Yeah,
Like a work scope for
yeah,
an
yeah,
RFP.
absolutely.
Okay. Because if we get those two things covered, I think we'll be able to move forward on this. Anybody else? Do we don't need do we need a motion or anything?
No,
So this is what we're gonna do between now and
And
I believe
19th.
it's the 19th of September. So this will go on the agenda for the 19th of September again.
well, it's the night I'm flying back in from Minneapolis. So I'll be here.
We ought to get you a Starlink.
Covered in bug
A
bites.
Starlink to go to Isle Royal with.
I thought about that.
You don't want it. I'm sure you don't want it. Okay, anybody else wanna comment on anything? Kevin, do you have any input you want to give us?
Nope.
That we haven't talked about?
Then I'll make the last motion of the night,
Please,
motion to adjourn.
My second.
in favor? Aye. Adjourn.
Thank you,
very
folks.
much, everybody.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Janae.
See, the thing is on the